With so much on the line for America's credibility on the world stage, let's bring in MS Now reporter Michael Schnell, David Rode, MS Now senior national security reporter, and MS Now political contributor Dr. Jason Johnson. He's a professor of politics and journalism at Morgan State University. All right, Michael Schnell, Trump says there are no limits on his power. I guess he has never watched Schoolhouse Rock. Given that Congress could, in fact, serve as a check on that power, what are you watching for on Capitol Hill right now?
Yeah, well, Alicia, sort of two dynamics. First off, the fact that as Senate Republicans learn more about this memorandum of understanding, they're hating it even more. So as now we enter into the 60-day period where the United States is actually going to be negotiating a long-term deal with Iran, curious as more details come out, what are these Senate Republicans going to say? And on the other side of the Capitol, the House side, the House hasn't been in session since this MOU was announced. They return back to the Capitol next week on Tuesday. So very curious to hear what folks have to say about this initial agreement. It's easy to just tweet when you want when Congress is out of session, but when you're being pressed by reporters in the halls of the Capitol, that's when we can get some more information and some unvarnished views about this memorandum of understanding. And then the second dynamic I'll be watching out for is Senate Republicans, in a way, have kind of backed themselves into a corner here, because as we were just learning more information about this MOU before Congress had actually gotten its hands on this document, a number of Senate Republicans said that they want the president to send the final deal to Congress and let Congress put its stamp of approval. They compared it to the JCPOA, given that Obama did not give it to Congress to give its stamp of approval. It was one of the reasons why President Trump was able to unilaterally draw that down. They want to have a vote. But now we're at a point where lawmakers actually have this information and they're not happy about it. So if we get a final deal, and by the way, I've spoken to a number of Republicans on Capitol Hill, nobody is certain that we will get to a final deal here because it is such an unpredictable nature of negotiations. But if we do, and these Republicans don't like it, they have two options. Are they going to continue that call for a vote and then actually potentially vote against it, which could be a massive blow to President Trump? Or do they make a 180 and say we actually don't need to vote on it? It could potentially be one of the biggest showdowns we have seen between Republicans on Capitol Hill and President Trump. And this is certainly going to continue changing, dynamic, potentially getting more contentious as, again, more information about that MOU, but also these forthcoming negotiations come into play.
David Rode, I keep thinking about the sound we played coming into this segment. Senators Cassidy, Cruz, Cotton, not necessarily normal critics of this president who do not believe this is a good deal. In the scenario that Michael just laid out for us, right, Republicans wanting this to come to the floor, actually take a vote on it, or realizing that's going to put them in a sticky position because they're actually going to have to go toe-to-toe with this president. How do you think it shakes out?
I don't think they'll bring it to a vote. Michael is the expert here. I'm kind of guessing at this, but I would say among members of Congress who are on the sort of National Security committees that would be Armed Services and Intelligence committees, there's real skepticism about this. Roger Wicker, who's the powerful chairman of the Senate Armed Services Committee from Mississippi, he put out a statement about how concerned he is, and that's pretty rare. I don't think members of Congress are going to want to be associated with this deal. And then I also think the fighting in Lebanon shows the sort of core flaws in this deal. We're going to have a problem. I mean, this deal was basically settled unilaterally by the Trump administration and the Iranian leadership. No Gulf states were consulted or had even seen the text. I talked to Gulf diplomats. They haven't seen it. And then the Israelis, after the very close relationship between the U.S. for years, were not aware of the text of this agreement, nor was anyone in Congress. So there's structural problems. Again, renewed fighting in Lebanon can derail this. And then I just think it going into Congress, will just become a mess for the administration, and they'll back off. And the president, as usual, will sort of embrace executive power and say he didn't need Congress's support anyway.
I mean, Jason Johnson, I am intrigued by the political fallout from this, not just among Senate Republicans, but along the larger conservative ecosystem, because they know this deal is bad and they can't square the deal being bad with the person who they claim is the greatest deal maker of all time having made a bad deal. So they are trying to lay this at the feet of the vice president. I want you to take a listen to what Fox's Brian Kilmeade had to say about J.D. Vance's role.
I just wonder if the vice president, who was against this, by all reports, was against the conflict to begin with, maybe he wasn't the right person to bring this conflict to an end. We'll find out.
Indeed, we will. The Atlantic asks Dr. Johnson, why would Trump authorize his vice president to make unnecessary concessions? Why, indeed, would a supposedly brilliant negotiator leave such an important negotiation to Vance at all? This is the president's to own.
It's so interesting to me that we've had back-to-back presidents who often saddled their vice presidents with unpleasant duties and tactics that will make it difficult for them to run in their stead. That's what I see initially. But the second thing is this, Alicia, and this is part of what makes it so silly. No one liked this deal. No one's going to be happy with this deal. They're trying to find somebody to blame, and J.D. Vance becomes the easy person to do so. But at the end of the day, all of the Republicans are going to own it. All of the Republicans are going to have responsibility for the negative impacts on the economy. So they can play hot potato as long as they would like with this. But at the end of the day, the average American understands their gas prices, their fuel prices, their grocery prices, all of those things went up in accordance with a war that no one seemed to think made any sense.
Those ramifications are real, and the world's going to feel it for a long time. But they are trying to just move on to the next story.
To your point, the Epstein files were dominating the headlines on the day that this war started. The president does like to change the subject. You mentioned Vice President J.D. Vance. He's no longer traveling to Switzerland for negotiations today with Iran, raising questions about the next phase of talks between our two countries. The White House cited difficult logistics for negotiations in announcing the postponement of that trip. The Swiss Foreign Ministry also said today's planned talks between the U.S., Iran, Qatar, and Pakistan would be pushed to a later date. Earlier yesterday, the vice president briefed reporters at the White House on the tentative deal with Iran, staunchly defending the agreement through a series of often misleading claims. Vance asserted lifting oil sanctions on Iran was, quote, not a new benefit for the country. But as the New York Times points out, under the preliminary deal, Iran will be able to sell its oil for more and to a wider array of buyers. The vice president also claimed the financial benefits to Iran will only be available if the country fully complies. But the agreement states the U.S. will unfreeze Tehran's assets and release restricted funds, quote, under the implementation of this MOU. Republican lawmakers, most of them privately, are appalled by this deal. They're saying so. Many who've supported Donald Trump through almost everything appalled. Some of them saying it out loud as well, voicing their reservations on the Trump administration's agreement to end the fighting, or at least to pause the fighting in Iran. In an interview yesterday, Republican chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee, Tom Cotton of Arkansas, criticized the provision lifting American sanctions on Iran's oil exports.
I do have concerns that certain aspects of this deal are a step in the wrong direction. For instance, we're going to lift sanctions on Iran's oil exports right away. And based on their pre-war rates of production and recent prices for a barrel of oil, you're looking at somewhere between $150 and $200 million a day. So that's $4.5 billion to $6 billion every single month. That's a lot of money. And we know that this terrorist revolutionary regime is not going to spend that money on daycares or on hospital. They're going to use it to rebuild their drone stockpiles, their missiles, to fund Hamas and to fund Hezbollah.
Meanwhile, the Republican chairman of the Senate Armed Services Committee, Roger Wicker of Mississippi, blasted that proposed $300 billion fund to rebuild Iran, writing in a statement it would, quote, make Iran's payoff under President Obama's 2015 deal look like a pittance by comparison. So, Jonathan Lemire, there you have high-ranking, prominent Republican senators speaking out in very specific ways against the deal made by the president. Has the White House absorbed in the last 24 hours all of this criticism? Again, not from us, but from Republicans, from the Wall Street Journal, from the New York Post, and all over the conservative media. And are they prepared to do anything about it? Is anything changing?
I mean, they hear it. They're not happy about it, but they're trying to just blow past it. It's another sign of just how desperate they are to just put this whole matter behind them. We saw, attempts to spin this yesterday from the president on Truth Social when he spoke briefly to reporters. I know he spoke to Mark Caputo from Axios. I believe we're talking to a little later about that. We had J.D. Vance, who's become sort of the face of these negotiations of late, go to the White House briefing room yesterday and talk about it. And I think there are a couple things here. Now, behind closed doors, there are some in the administration who are concerned that Iran won't hold up their end of the deal. And that's a reasonable concern because Iran has never held up their end of the deal. So that's part of this. But I think there is a recognition, they're not going to say it publicly, that this was nowhere near what they thought was going to happen when this war started. And they are hearing these Republicans, slam every piece of this. None of the president's war aims, that he outlined, in the conflict's first days were accomplished. I also wrote this week about this was a defeat for President Trump. Makes him and the nation look weaker on the global stage. So we are going to see they're trying to spin this. They're going to keep trying to do that. But then I think they're going to try to just move on. That's how this, Willie, as we well know, that's how the Trump administration has always worked, in particular in the political shop in the West Wing and the president himself. He believes he has tremendous faith in his ability to change the topic of conversation. If there are bad headlines, he throws something else out there. He tries to distract. He tries to move on to the next thing. And they think that in the coming days, they'll be able to do that as well. They're more concerned about the politics right now than they are about the long-term geopolitical ramifications. Now,
You can tell Trump's latest deal isn't exactly winning over Congress. If it were, members of his own party wouldn't be openly pushing back against it. What's fascinating is that opposition is coming from multiple directions at once. On one side, you have the small group of lawmakers who genuinely bought into the original America First message. Whether you agree with them or not, some of these people actually believe the promise of fewer foreign entanglements, less intervention overseas, and a stronger focus on domestic issues. They're frustrated because they see this as a betrayal of that message. Then you have the more traditional Republican establishment figures and foreign policy hawks. They're unhappy for completely different reasons. Their vision of American power has always involved a more aggressive international posture, and they're not particularly interested in being branded as the anti-war party. So Trump has managed to create a situation where both camps are upset at the same time. That's a political problem. Democrats aren't going to rescue him either. They have their own reasons for opposing the deal, and they have little incentive to hand Trump a major victory. So the usual path of picking up bipartisan support looks increasingly difficult. The result is a fractured coalition. The traditional hawks don't like where things ended up. The true believers in the original America First message don't like where things ended up. Democrats don't like it either. When every major faction walks away unhappy, it's hard to argue that the deal is some kind of political masterstroke. And that's what makes this moment so revealing. For years, Trump held together a coalition that often contained competing interests and contradictory priorities. But eventually, those contradictions catch up with you. Eventually, people start asking whether the promises match the outcomes. That's what's happening now. The foreign policy hawks feel disappointed because they didn't get the outcome they wanted. The anti-intervention crowd feels disappointed because they think Trump abandoned the principles he campaigned on. Meanwhile, Democrats see no reason to support him. So who's left celebrating? That's the problem. In politics, a successful deal usually creates a winning coalition. This one seems to have done the opposite. Instead of bringing people together, it's exposing just how divided Trump's political coalition has become. And when every side believes it got the short end of the stick, that's usually not a sign of strength. It's a sign that the cracks are getting harder to hide.